I would like to welcome everybody to this meeting of being hosted by the Socialist Equality Party, as I said, to announce the launch of the 2022 SEP election campaign. My name's Cheryl Crisp. I'm the National Secretary of the SEP and I'll be chairing today's meeting. On Saturday, the SEP announced that we were standing 6 Senate candidates in the federal election due to be launched on to go to the election, I'm trying to say, on May the 21st. 2 candidates in Queensland, 2 in New South Wales and 2 in Victoria. Our 6 members who will fight for and represent the interests of not just the Australian working class, but that of workers internationally. Our candidates from New South Wales, Max Boddy, who will be speaking today, and Oscar Grenfell. From Victoria, Peter Byrne and Jason Wardle, and Queensland, Mike Head, who will also address the meeting today, and John Davis. We are immensely proud of our candidates, all of whom have stood as candidates for the SEP in previous elections and have established a record in the fight for a socialist program and perspective in the working class and amongst young people. To say that everything possible has been erected as a barrier to the SEP standing candidates would really not be an exaggeration. Firstly, the deregistration of 13 political parties, including the SEP, the result of the bipartisan legislation enacted in 2021, demanding the trebling of the 500 members already required to be submitted to the AEC in order that we can stand under our name. As a result of the party's deregistration, which we certainly have to fight to overturn, we were obliged to provide 600 unique nominees for our candidates. In a little over a week, we won more than 750 signatures to secure above the line group placing. The response to our call for signatures from our supporters and on street campaigns was enthusiastic, not just for our democratic right to stand, but importantly, as that it is a socialist candidate that people wanted to have standing in the election. We've characterised this election campaign as really 2 parallel campaigns. One for the media to present, which is of mudslinging, photo ops and funding promises which will never be kept. Then there is the real campaign, which is being conducted on behalf of the corporate elite, the ruling class, and of US imperialism. This is the discussion which demands that whatever government comes to office on May the 21st must be one which will carry out the requirements of international and Australian capitalism. This is certainly not the first election that we have described as a crisis election, but this really is a crisis election like no other in our living memory. It is being held under conditions of the greatest health and social crisis since World War I, and one in which capitalism has brought the world to the brink of catastrophe. 2 years of the pandemic, which has killed, in effect, really more than 20 million people worldwide. 2 years on with the development of vaccines and measures demonstrated in China, New Zealand, and in this country, which can suppress and eliminate the virus, it spreads unchecked and with even more deadly consequences. This is not the result of the characteristics of the virus, but of the decisions of every capitalist government to unleash the virus in favour of production, profit and wealth. The World Socialist website described the pandemic as a trigger event, analogous to that of the outbreak of World War I, and that assessment has been completely confirmed. Now the trigger has been pulled, and the result is the descent into war, as evidenced by what can only be described as a proxy war by the US and NATO against Russia, using Ukraine as the staging ground for such a war. The utterly reckless actions by the Biden administration and NATO to provoke Russia to invade was part of a long devised perspective by the United States to dismember and plunder the Russian landmass and its huge resources. The bankrupt actions of the Putin regime, which the World Socialist website, the Socialist Equality Party, and the International Committee completely oppose by invading Ukraine, is really the final result of the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. Putin's bankrupt hope was to pressure the US to engage in negotiations concerning Ukraine's entry into NATO. That has been entirely futile. The result of these actions has to pit Russian and Ukrainian workers against each other and to create immense confusion throughout the world's population. It has also brought the world closer to a third world war and a nuclear war in nature than at any other time since the end of World War II. The aim is not just to subjugate Russia, but also to launch war against China. And the Australian government, with the full support of Labor, are spearheading this drive. Today, which is Anzac Day, Defence Minister Dutton declared the only way to preserve peace in the Pacific region is to prepare for war. Nothing could be more clear and more overt that the Australian government, with all the political elite, are preparing and spearheading the campaign and the provocations against China. The consequences of the war in the Ukraine have been felt by every section of the world's working class. The pandemic, which itself caused disruptions to production and supply chains, has now been further exacerbated by the war itself. Russia and Ukraine, often referred to as the world's breadbasket, being the source of most of the world's sunflower oil, wheat, and fertilizers, as well as oil, gas, and minerals, which have also now been disrupted and cut, has resulted in massive price hikes in all of these commodities. The threat of hunger and starvation now emerge as clear possibilities following the result of the war and the consequence of food shortages. Climate change, as a result of the unbridled degradation of the planet in the interests of profit and production, threatens the very existence of life. Capitalism has been exposed as a system which is incompatible with human life as we know it. There are really two alternatives facing the working class in this country and globally. Either accept capitalism and its future, which will include the imposition of fascist and right-wing forms of rule, or the working class mobilizes and fights for the overthrow of capitalism for a socialist society in which production is planned and organized not for the wealth of the tiny few, but for society as a whole. And it is this perspective that we will be discussing this afternoon and which our three speakers will present. The first of those three speakers, who I'm very pleased to introduce, is the Assistant National Secretary of the SEP in Sri Lanka, Deepal Jayasekera. Comrade Jayasekera will speak to the meeting today about the very serious situation which confronts the Sri Lankan workers and rural masses, and the fight of the SEP in that country, which is the section of the International Committee to provide a socialist perspective and way forward for the masses. Our second speaker will be Comrade Mike Head, and our third, Comrade Max Boddy. But as I said, I am very, very pleased to introduce Comrade Deepal Jayasekera, who will be our initial speaker.
Comrades, I bring revolutionary greetings on behalf of the Socialist Equality Party in Sri Lanka to this meeting to launch the election campaign of the SEP in Australia. For nearly a month, the Sri Lankan government of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has been shaken to the core by growing popular protests throughout the island, demanding he and his government resign. At the main protest site at Goldface Green in central Colombo, thousands have been protesting, staying there day and night in April 9. Workers, youth, professionals, and rural poor have come onto the streets due to the unbearable conditions generated by the shortages and skyrocketing prices of essentials like fuel, medicine, and food, and hours-long daily power outages. People have to queue for hours to obtain basic items such as cooking gas cylinders to prepare meals. Among the poorest layers of the population, hunger and starvation are looming. The economic, social, and political turmoil confronting the Rajapaksa government and bourgeois rule in Sri Lanka is being driven by the global crisis of capitalism that has dramatically escalated with the COVID-19 pandemic and again with US-NATO proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. Similar social conditions throughout the world have propelled workers and youth into strikes and protests in the US, Europe, Africa, and Asia Pacific, including India. The widespread anti-government protests in Sri Lanka are the sharpest expression of what is developing globally and in every country. The rapidity of Sri Lankan developments indicates that very acute social tensions that have been building up over years can explode onto the surface of political life very quickly. In the current protest movement, it is significant that workers, youth, and rural toilers are united across all ethnic and religious communal lines. That is Sinhala, Tamil, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, and Christian. In opposition to the reactionary decades-long attempts by all sections of the ruling class to whip up communalism, to divide and weaken the working class. The protests have severely undermined the Rajapaksa government, which is now hanging by a thread. It has effectively lost its parliamentary majority, as dozens of parliamentarians have left the ruling coalition and announced that they will act independently in parliament. Major sections of big business, fearful of the revolutionary implication of the situation, have written to the president calling for the establishment of a bipartisan national government that would include the opposition party. The main opposition party, however, have refused to form such a government unless the president resigns. In a further expression of government's immense crisis, the chief monks of all four major Buddhist chapters have issued the statement calling for the appointment of a multi-party cabinet to deal with the crisis. This is a significant shift by the Buddhist establishment, which holds a powerful position in the political establishment in Sri Lanka. The actions of big business and the Buddhist hierarchy have nothing to do with concerns about the enormous difficulties faced by the working people and rural toilers. They fear that the current anti-government protests can develop into a movement threatening bourgeois rule as a whole with the participation of broader sections of the working class. The call for a national unity government is a desperate attempt to diffuse popular opposition and buy time. The weakness of the Rajapaksa government does not mean that it will not resort to the most brutal methods to suppress the protest. In a thinly veiled threat during a national televised address on April 11, Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa branded the protesters as a threat to democracy and reminded the audience of the way in which previous government had dealt with such threats. During the late 1980s, around 60,000 youth in the island south were shot by military-backed death squads to hold rural unrest. Hundreds of thousands died in the protracted anti-Tamil war by successive Colombo governments against the separatist liberation tigers of Tamil Eelam. Mahinda Rajapaksa, as president, presided over the brutal military offensives that killed tens of thousands of Tamil civilians in the final months of the war in 2009. His brother Gotabaya, as defense secretary, was directly involved in these atrocities. Last Tuesday, a heavily armed police battalion opened fire on thousands of people protesting against the fuel price hikes in town of Tambukka, killing a worker, Taminda Laksa. People had been waiting for many hours for fuel to arrive, only to find it was much more expensive. The police shooting was a signal to the investors and global bankers that the government is prepared to crush popular opposition to the harsh austerity measures it is implementing. The conditions facing working people are going to get far worse. As the shooting took place, Finance Minister Ali Sabri was in Washington, starting talks with the IMF for an emergency bailout package, which will inevitably come with harsh demands. The IMF is already insisting on the further slashing of price subsidies, huge cuts to government expenditure, and the privatization of state-owned corporations that will mean the widespread destruction of jobs and conditions. The Rajapaksa government knows very well that the new austerity measures will inevitably provoke social struggles, involving broader sections of the working class. The trade unions, which are responsible for sabotaging and betraying the wave of strikes in recent years, have been trying to block the independent intervention of the working class as a class in current protest. However, there is a groundswell of opposition involving broad layers of workers pressing for strike action or wages and other demands that will not be satisfied with the limited action called so far. The Socialist Equality Party in Sri Lanka has been intervening in this huge protest movement against the government, advocating an independent socialist program for the working class. Its statement issued on April 7 has been circulated in the thousands in both Sinhala and Tamil languages. The SCP has backed the protest demand, Gota go home, for President Rajapaksa to resign, but pointed out that it is not enough to call for Rajapaksa's removal. As the statement explains, quote, as a key step in addressing the current political crisis, the SCP demands the immediate abolition of the executive presidency, with its sweeping autocratic powers hold a gun to the heads of the working class, unquote. The SCP is fighting to develop an independent movement of the working class against the Rajapaksa government and bourgeois rule. We have been calling for workers to form action committees, independent of the trade unions in workplace, plantations, and neighborhood, just as our comrades in Australia advocate the establishment of rank and file committees. The SCP has proposed a program and policies to animate the work of the action committees to address the pressing needs of the masses, unquote, including workers' democratic control over the production and distribution of all essential items and other resources critical for the lives of people. The nationalization of banks, big corporations, plantations, and other major economic centers, the repudiation of all foreign debt, and no to the austerity demands of the IMF and World Bank. This is the basis for the working class to rally all the oppressed masses, including the rural poor, in the struggle for a government of workers and peasants committed to socialist policies as part of the broader struggle for socialism in South Asia and internationally. Thank you very much, comrades.
Thank you so much, Jayasekera. Look, we will obviously be opening up at the end of the speakers for questions and answers. So, and I know that the connection and some of the accent could be difficult to understand, but I'm sure we'll be able to ask Jayasekera questions in the discussion later. Our next speaker will be Comrade Mike Head. Mike has been a member of the SEP for now almost 47 years. He is a writer for the World Socialist website, has stood in elections many times before, is a well-known and very important contributor to the analysis of the SEP in Australia and throughout the region. I am very pleased to introduce him today to you, in which he will discuss the political situation here and internationally, and after which, as I said, we will open up for questions.
It would be a mistake for anyone to think that the situation that has erupted rapidly in Sri Lanka is confined to the island state. The election in Australia is taking place in conditions where an historic crisis of capitalist rule is already erupting here too. There is mounting political disaffection and frustration. Support for both the ruling parties, the Liberal National Coalition and the Labor Party, is at record lows. The disgusting official election campaign of diversionary point scoring, phony promises and mudslinging has two basic aims. One is to camouflage the essential bipartisan unity on imposing the requirements of the corporate elite and the warmongers in Washington. The other aim, above all, is to divert attention from the real issues. There is a conspiracy by the entire media and political establishment to cover up the major dangers facing ordinary people and the future of workers and young people in particular: the COVID-19 pandemic, war, climate change, and the worsening social crisis. Millions of working people, like their class brothers and sisters around the globe, are confronted by the spreading and mutating COVID-19 pandemic, already into its third and most deadly year because of the profit-crazed let-it-rip policies of all the capitalist parties. Now people face the rising danger of a nuclear world war, triggered by the US and its allies against both Russia and China, and with Australia on the front line, serving as a warfare base for the US. At the same time, there is staggering and accelerating social inequality, with the world's billionaires having doubled their fortunes in the pandemic so far. The soaring cost of living and climate-related disasters such as bushfires and floods, in which governments have blatantly abandoned people. Far from the ludicrous official and media image of an exceptional Australian recovery at the end of the pandemic and record low unemployment, the reality confronting working people is poverty-level wages, rising financial stress, COVID illness, widespread fear of infection, global warming, and the threat of a catastrophic US-led war against China. I want to speak firstly on the war danger. As we have explained on the World Socialist website, the war in Ukraine is not a local or temporary conflict. It marks a new period of global war for imperialist control over resources, markets, and geostrategic landmasses. As in all major conflicts, the question of who fired the first shot cannot explain the nature of the war its source lies not in Washington, not in Moscow, but in Washington. Confronting social and political turmoil at home, the Biden administration has brought forward long-standing plans to subordinate both Russia and China in order to arrest American capitalism's historic decline. It has deliberately goaded the Russian capitalist President Putin into a reactionary and reckless war. As we say in our election statement, many workers and young people are rightly distrustful of the daily deluge of propaganda demonizing Putin. We have seen it all before in the barbaric US-led wars in the Balkans, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and Libya. No one has forgotten the lies of weapons of mass destruction which justified the invasion and destruction of Iraqi society. The US and NATO are using Ukraine and its people to conduct a proxy war that takes to a new level the 3 decades of unending wars by the US and its partners to shore up the global hegemony Washington asserted after World War II. It is no accident that the question of war was placed front and center of the election campaign this weekend. Increasingly, this is a key election, also driven by the turn to war to distract from the deteriorating social conditions and to divert explosive class tensions. In an interview with the Sunday Telegraph and the other Murdoch tabloids, Defence Minister Peter Dutton warned people to be, quote, prepared for the inconceivable, alleging that China is seeking to turn Australia and Indo-Pacific nations into tributary states. Dutton said Australia's strategic position was as dire as it was in the lead up to World War II, invoking the spectre of an invasion from the north. He even declared without a shred of evidence that China is preparing chemical attacks against an Australian city. Labor's response was to outdo the coalition in war rhetoric. Opposition Defence spokesman Brendan O'Connor vowed that an Albanese Labor government would get more firepower into service quickly. In fact, within 3 to 5 years. He said Labor would fast track the purchase of new armed drones and urgently boost the nation's missile stocks. O'Connor asserted Labor's historic role as the party called upon by the ruling class to conduct war. And I quote, "The fact is, we are the party of John Curtin. John Curtin had to replace a government that collapsed on the floor of the parliament, led by Robert Menzies. And he had to take responsibility for leading Australia during the Second World War. The Curtin was installed as Prime Minister by the Governor General in a hung parliament after 2 independent MPs deserted the Conservative government in October 1941. After the Pacific War against Japan began in December 1941, Curtin initiated the US military alliance, an historic shift from Australian capitalism's dependence on the British Empire. In his radio broadcast, Curtin declared, and I quote, "Without any inhibitions of any kind, I make it clear that Australia looks to America, free of any pangs as to our traditional links or kinship with the United Kingdom." Today, with the coalition government again imploding and the prospect looming of a hung parliament, Labor is the party most committed to Washington. It is volunteering to impose a US-initiated war and its sacrifices on the working class, backed by the trade unions. This war drive explains why the issue of Solomon Islands has suddenly become so central. Labor has accused the Morrison government of committing the greatest failure of national security since World War II by permitting this small Pacific island state to sign a security treaty with China. The reference to World War II is significant. The Solomons became one of the pivotal battlefields of that war, the 6-month US Battle of Guadalcanal against Japan. Successive US administrations have designated their counterparts in Canberra as the enforcers of imperialist interests in the Southwest Pacific. As Coalition Prime Minister John Howard once declared, Australia is the deputy sheriff in the region. Yesterday, the obvious fury in Washington at the Morrison government's dereliction of duty was on display. The US National Security Council coordinator for the Indo-Pacific, Kurt Campbell, traveled to Solomon Islands to deliver a White House ultimatum to Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavaro. Campbell warned, and I quote, "If steps are taken to establish a de facto permanent military presence, power projection capabilities, or a military installation, the delegation noted that the United States would then have significant concerns and respond accordingly." Morrison quickly followed suit. He said a Chinese base in the Solomons in our region, quote, would be a, quote, red line. The precise nature of the White House threat was not publicly elaborated, but it reeks of another regime change operation. This can only be explained by the advanced preparations for war against China by the US, in which the Australian government and military will play a central role. The Biden administration will not tolerate a government in Canberra that cannot be relied upon to police the US grip over the Pacific, nor will it tolerate a government that will in any way fail to maintain Australia as a war platform, featuring an array of key US bases, such as the expanded Pine Gap satellite communications and missile guidance facility near Alice Springs. We saw that in 2010, when the Obama administration, with Biden as vice president, conspired with Labor and union bosses to install Gillard to replace Rudd after the elected prime minister had suggested that the US should accommodate China's rise as a regional power. The head of the US Indo-Pacific Command, Admiral John Aquilino, recently told the Financial Times that Australia was, quote, an extremely high-end partner, particularly in regard to long-range hypersonic missiles. Albanese has also invoked John Curtin as the author of the US alliance, just as he has hailed Hawke and Keating as the architects of pro-business economic restructuring. Albanese insists there is no daylight between Labor and the government on national security. Labor has agreed with the AUKUS Treaty, the acquisition of nuclear submarines, and the sighting of hypersonic missiles in Australia. This marks an historic turn toward open preparations for a US-led war against China. There is not one other party outside the Socialist Equality Party standing in these elections opposing the explosion of militarism and war, including Australia's frontline participation in the US-led war drive. The Greens and the pseudo-left groups, which once postured as opponents of US wars, have all lined up behind the confrontations with Russia and China. Likewise, the SEP is the only party raising and fighting the endless incarceration of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, an Australian citizen, for exposing the war crimes and diplomatic intrigues perpetrated by the US and its allies. Washington is all the more intent on silencing Assange for good and intimidating any other whistleblowers because of the even greater war crimes it is preparing. That is why the Australian government has declared it will do nothing for the Australian journalists, a position again shared by Labor. Albanese has not so much as mentioned his name in the course of the election campaign. Any illusion that a Labor government will protect Assange is just that, an illusion and entirely false. The SEP will continue to take the fight for Assange's freedom into the working class, making it a central feature of our election campaign. The SEP is also alone in warning that the election will resolve nothing for working people. As soon as the voting is out of the way, whichever party forms the next government, it will unleash austerity measures to pay down the $1.2 trillion debt incurred by pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into corporate support packages throughout the pandemic and into military expansion. Last week, the International Monetary Fund, in its global fiscal outlook, warned that Australia has suffered one of the largest budget deteriorations in the developed world and one of the biggest increases in debt. So-called budget repair has to start soon, the IMF insisted. Budget repair means slashing social spending, including on welfare and public health, education and housing. Australia may not yet be in the same dire situation as Sri Lanka, where the Rajapaksa government is having its brutal austerity measures dictated directly by the IMF, but that could just be a matter of timing. Of the 34 developed nations tracked by the IMF, Australia will have the 8th largest structural deficit next financial year at 3.6% of gross domestic product. The deficits are running at around 80 billion a year, the largest deficits in the country's history. Australia has also suffered one of the largest increases in gross debt in the developed world. When the coalition took office in 2013, Australia's gross debt was 30.5% of GDP. By next year, it will have more than doubled to 62.5% and is headed for 1.2 trillion within 2 years. We are the only party exposing the reality confronting workers and youth and providing a program for the working class to overcome the crisis by taking power and reorganising society. The discontent of working people finds no expression whatsoever in the official election campaign or the corporate media. This disaffection has not developed overnight. It is a product of decades of successive governments, especially trade union-backed Labor governments, enforcing the dictates of the corporate elite against the working class. What is taking place is a shift to the left, not the right, by ordinary people. Far-right parties such as Hanson and Palmer's remain on low levels of support, around 4% each, even according to media polls. As our nomination campaign showed, people are looking for an alternative and keen to see a socialist one. Support for Labor and the coalition remains so low that the ruling class is alarmed by the prospect of a hung parliament, something that will also be of grave concern in Washington, which regards Australia as an absolutely essential base for its coming war against China. There are signs of a potential political breakup of the old parties, as has already happened in countries such as France, Italy, and Greece, as well as Sri Lanka. It is difficult to imagine a government going into an election more racked by popular hostility and divisions than this one, with Morrison being denounced by many figures inside the Liberal National Coalition itself. For months, the government was unable to get any legislation through Parliament without Labor's assistance. And that is after 2 years in which it is dependent upon Labor's support via the National Cabinet, an unconstitutional cabal surrounded by secrecy, a bipartisan de facto government, unprecedented, except in wartime. Labor's debate between Morrison and Albanese was a virtual love fest, with each on first name terms and praising each other's party. Morrison hailed Labor's historic role, even led by Julia and Bill, introducing supposed big reforms, especially the NDIS. Albanese boasted of having adopted the good ideas of the government, such as refugee boat turnbacks and COVID stimulus packages. This was not just an expression of bipartisan unity, but of their mutual fear of the growing discontent. Albanese in particular pleaded that a Labor government was needed to restore faith in the parliamentary order, but the only proposal he had to offer was an integrity commission. He could not say a word about the real reasons for the hostility, such as the pandemic, let alone oppose the $10 billion cut to public health funding in this year's budget, or offer any solutions. This is a truly historic crisis of bourgeois rule. Since its debacle at the 2019 election, Labor has continually shifted further to the right on both domestic and foreign policy. That began immediately after the 2019 election, when Albanese ditched the phony fair go rhetoric, which convinced no one, and proclaimed Labor to be the party of, quote, wealth creation, quote, aspiration, and economic, quote, reform, a la Hawke and Keating. Now Labor is shifting further to the right throughout the election campaign, marching to the orders of big business and the corporate media. There's nothing like Labor's supposed 2019 promises to boost spending on education and health. In fact, Labor is pitching to the right of the government in attacking it for not boosting productivity, as did the Hawke and Keating governments and their trade union partners, not addressing budget repair, and Labor is calling for faster military preparation for war. The Greens and various independents offer no alternative. They are capitalist outfits all seeking to do a deal to prop up a Labor or coalition government. The Greens are pitching to form another de facto government with a minority Labor administration, as they did with Gillard's in 2010. That was the government that signed up to Obama's pivot to Asia to confront China, including by basing US Marines in Darwin. As for the pseudo-left groups, the Socialist Alliance and the Victorian Socialists, their main preoccupation is with trying to corral the discontent of workers and youth back into the hands of Labor and the unions, while embracing the war drive against Russia and China. Decades of abject treachery and betrayal by the trade unions and the Labor Party have led to growing anger and rebelliousness toward these organisations, which are a barrier to any struggle by workers for their class interests. New workers' organisations, independent of the unions and guided by a revolutionary perspective, are needed. We encourage workers to form democratically elected rank and file committees in every factory and workplace and working class suburb as the means to break out of the shackles of the trade unions. In our election statement, we advanced demands to meet the pressing needs of working people. These demands inexorably lead to the issue of which class is to hold the reins of power. A workers' government resting on organs created by the working class in its struggles has to be established to reorganise society along socialist lines as part of the fight for socialism internationally. As we explained in our election statement, the SEP is not like other parties. Our ambition is not to gain seats in the capitalist parliament. We are based on the principles of socialist internationalism that guided the October 1917 Russian Revolution, and which were defended against Stalinism by the left opposition and the Fourth International led by Leon Trotsky. We call on workers to vote for the SEP candidates, to demonstrate support for a socialist alternative, but none of the issues confronting workers can be resolved through Parliament. Nothing less than the overthrow of global capitalism is needed, and that requires the building of a new revolutionary leadership throughout the working class. We urge everyone taking part in this meeting to seriously consider our program and join the SEP to help build the mass party needed for this struggle. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Mike. And I'm sure Mike's contribution has provoked a number of questions and discussion, which we're very happy to take at the conclusion of the third speaker. And that speaker is Max Boddy. Max is the Assistant National Secretary of the SEP in Australia, and he is our Senate candidate for New South Wales in the election. Max is 33. He stood in the 2019 elections in the Hunter region, and he also writes for the World Socialist website. Max writes in particular on the issues facing asylum seekers and their inhumane treatment at the hands of Australian governments, Liberal and Labor. Now, Max will address you, and then, as I said, we will open up for any questions and discussion. But please welcome Max.
Okay, thank you, Comrade Cheryl, and welcome everybody. In this election, the Socialist Equality Party advances a socialist program of action for the working class. This program opposes the relentless drive to war by capitalist governments, fights for the elimination of COVID-19, and an ending to the decades of austerity measures against the working class. The source of these developments is the historic breakdown of the global capitalist profit system, which dominates every aspect of the lives of the working class. All of society's needs are subordinated to profit. Even the basic right of being protected from the deadly health effects of a new virus is done away with in the interest of reopening the country so profits can flow. If the official narrative of the election campaign is to be believed, you would think the pandemic is over, superseded by a mythical economic recovery. However, just 2 weeks into the campaign, these lies, promoted by both Labor and the coalition, have been utterly exposed, with Labor leader Anthony Albanese testing positive for COVID-19 last week. There is a level of recklessness in the campaign trail. Albanese, just days before testing positive, visited aged care facilities along the south coast of New South Wales, potentially infecting hundreds of vulnerable residents. He participated in the first election debate with Morrison, in which no one wore masks. Already, 4 journalists in Albanese's entourage have tested positive. In his first interview since isolating, Albanese revealed that Labor MPs Jason Clare, Tony Burke, and Christina Keneally have all tested positive for COVID since the budget week in late March, as well as a range of other undisclosed people. This is in addition to Morrison and Minister for Defence Peter Dutton, who tested positive in early March. Western Australia Premier Mark McGowan's entire family have been infected, with one of his children being hospitalised. When the Omicron virus was detected in late November, it was used as the pretext for the reopening of the country and letting the virus rip, under the lie that it was a milder variant. Liberal New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet worked tag team with Labor Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews to reopen the country. Central to this murderous policy was the reopening of face-to-face schooling, which resulted in tens of thousands of children and their families testing positive. An entire generation of the most vulnerable of society have been condemned to infection, illness, and possible death, and as yet still unknown long-term health conditions as a result. Now, the government and health officials claim the Omicron BA2 wave has peaked. In truth, the only time the infections and death have been higher was January 2022, the result of the milder Omicron variant, so-called mild. And even these figures are entirely spurious because PCR testing has collapsed or been shut down, replaced by RATs, which are unreliable and unreportable. More than 5.2 million cases have been detected in Australia since the beginning of the year. Daily case numbers range from 30,000 to exceeding 50,000. Deaths since the beginning of the year are approaching 5,000, more than double that of the previous 2 years of the pandemic combined. Now, you may not be able to see the numbers on the slide in front of you, but you can certainly see the dramatic rises both in cases and deaths in the graphs. Now, since the beginning of the election campaign, some 2 weeks old, there have been 428 deaths from COVID. It took 7 months for the first 421 deaths to be recorded. Now, this is the direct result of the conscious policies pursued by Labor and Liberal governments alike, both state and federal. They were warned by epidemiologists that this would happen, but they don't take advice from health experts now, but business advisors. All the measures which proved successful in suppressing the virus have been dispensed with. As we say in our election statement, this is a policy of wholesale murder that serves the needs of big business to drive workers back into the factories and workplaces to ensure the continued production of profits, end quote. What has been revealed in this pandemic is really two Australias. For the rich, the pandemic has been a massive payday. Australia's top 200 richest individuals have increased their wealth by an eye-watering $150 billion in just 2 years. For workers, young people and pensioners, the situation has just been a catastrophe. According to a November report released by the Australian Housing and Urban Research Institute, between 1.5 million to 2 million low-income people are at risk of homelessness. This is fueled by soaring housing costs, with median housing prices in major cities doubling since January 2020 from around $500,000 to exceeding $1 million. Rents increased by 10% in 2021 and in rural areas by 18% since 2020. According to official figures, inflation hit 3.5% last year, meaning wages fell by 1.2%, but this is a vast understatement. In the last quarter, grocery prices in some major supermarkets increased by 4.3%, as well as a 4.5% increase in non-discretionary goods last year. Petrol alone increased 32% in 2021, and prices have exceeded $2.10 a litre this year. Workers are forced into increasingly insecure and low-paid employment, with many working multiple jobs to make ends meet. Both Albanese and Morrison have hidden this reality in their election campaign, with the fraudulent claim of jobs growth and record unemployment. And the official unemployment figure from the Australian Bureau of Statistics is 4%, another entirely fraudulent number because anybody working 1 hour a fortnight is considered employed. The Roy Morgan Polling Company gives a more accurate picture of joblessness. Their figure is 8.5% unemployment in February, which is 1.2 million workers, with underemployment reaching 7.8%, meaning the total amount of unemployed and underemployed workers is 16.3%, or 2.35 million workers. The bogus claim of recovery and jobs belies the reality of multiple jobs at abysmal pay rates. According again to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, multiple job holders rose by 13.1% in the last quarter of 2021, reaching a new record of 861,000. And according to some reports, 1 worker in 3 are in insecure work. This includes casual work, labour hire, gig economy workers, and those on fixed-term contracts. All of this is absent from the official election campaign. Behind the mudslinging and various political diversions, Morrison's and Albanese's election pitches are directed to the financial elite. Each is vying to demonstrate who is more capable of carrying out the austerity measures dictated by big business. Following the debacle of the 2019 election, Albanese was installed as leader of the opposition. He dropped Labor's utterly bogus promises to tinker with aspects of social inequality. Since the beginning of the election campaign, Albanese has scrapped the promise of even a review of the below poverty level job seeker payments, while making clear Labor would not reverse the coalition's tax cuts to the rich. In an interview with the Murdoch Daily Telegraph, Albanese said that a Labor government would not prevent the construction of new coal mines, making clear that any posturing on the issue of climate change is completely phony. This is a critical question facing workers and young people internationally, as extreme weather events are now becoming commonplace. In Australia, the devastating bushfires and floods over the past 3 years have seen the complete abandonment of the victims. They are told that they must fend for themselves, with the areas like Lismore now resembling war zones as thousands are left homeless. Whichever party gets into power, it will be one of the most right-wing governments in Australian history. The unions are completely aligned with the pro-business Labor Party, whom they promote as some better alternative to the coalition. They are deeply fearful of the growing struggle of workers erupting out of their control and seek to work closely with the Labor Party to suppress the growing movement of workers. This is why Albanese continually invokes the legacy of the Hawke and Keating Labor governments, which worked hand in hand with the unions to deregulate the economy and presided over the destruction of hundreds of thousands of jobs from 1983 to 1996. For their part, the unions have played a pivotal role throughout the pandemic, summed up by the Australian Council of Trade Union Secretary Sally McManus telling employers, quote, "You can get everything you want from the unions in 2020. However, after decades of suppression by the union apparatus, the class struggle is re-emerging in Australia. Last year saw the first statewide strike of New South Wales teachers in a decade. This year, New South Wales nurses took to the street in 2 statewide strikes held in a month and a half. Both the nurses and teachers defied rulings of the Industrial Relations Commission, which ordered the strikes be called off. And this reveals workers' real anger and willingness to fight and oppose the conditions they face. Other healthcare workers, including paramedics and workers in key industrial areas, are also involved in industrial disputes over wages and intolerable working conditions. Now, our campaign is above all aimed at providing workers with the political weapons and organisational means to fight for their interests. This is why we call for the formation of rank and file committees amongst workers, which provide the basis for the fight against the onslaught on wages and conditions. Workers are already advancing the demand for unified action instead of the isolated strikes. The trade union's response is the same as it has been for decades, that no common struggle is possible because of workplace laws that prohibit all industrial action. What they don't say is that they helped draft these anti-strike laws, which were put in place by the last Labor government through the draconian Fair Work legislation. An elementary demand of all the rank and file committees must be the abolition of all anti-strike laws, which are used to menace workers across the country. The unification of workers is essential to end the COVID-19 pandemic, halt the drive to war, and reverse the decades-long assault on jobs conditions. To this end, the SEP advances a series of demands to meet the pressing needs of the working class, and to name just a few, call for the immediate rise in all pay to compensate for past erosions, which included indexing all wages to the current cost of living, full-time permanent work on decent wages for all who want one, a living wage for those unable to work, an ending to the super exploitation of young people as cheap, casual and contract labour, mandatory public health measures to eliminate COVID-19, with workers, not management, deciding what is safe on the job. While the financial elite will decry, there is no money for such demands. It is the working class, which is the source of all wealth in society, that must decide what is affordable and what is not. The colossal wealth of the billionaires and major banks and corporations must be put under the democratic control of the working class. Our party, as Comrade Mike has said, is not like any other party in the elections. Our ambition is not to establish as many members of parliament as possible. As we write in our election statement, I'll quote, "We are based on the principles of socialist internationalism that animated the Russian Revolution and the creation of the first and only genuine workers' state in history. We also stand on the lessons of the political fight waged by Leon Trotsky against the betrayal of the Russian Revolution by the Stalinist bureaucracy that usurped power from the working class. We are part of an international party, the ICFI, that alone defends and fights for the program and perspective that underpins the Fourth International founded by Trotsky in 1938, end quote. The chief lesson of this political heritage is that a revolutionary leadership of the working class must be built prior to the eruption of mass struggle. I join with other comrades speaking today to urge all workers and young people to support our election campaign however you can. But above all, I urge you to consider making the decision to join the party as a full member. Come into the ranks of the revolutionary movement and fight for an international socialist perspective in the working class. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. Well, look, at this point, we will open up for questions, for discussion, anything on any aspect of the reports today, and also on the World Socialist website, or any points that that you feel that you'd like clarified. We want to create the opportunity for people to have a discussion. I mean, there's no other forum, there's no other venue for people to come together and discuss what are the underlying historic major issues that confront ordinary people. We actually do have some questions that have, and there's comments. I won't read all the comments. And one of the questions we're seeking clarification, but until we get that clarification, there's a question from Penny and Rob, who are asking, why is the Labor Party failing to support Assange? Which I think is an excellent question, and one that we certainly have an answer to. There's also another question. I've noticed some Greens criticising the drive to war with moralistic type claims that it is based in xenophobia. They use the word racism more generally, and without, no surprises here, connecting this in any way to the march of imperialism. I have asked a few of them as a way to point out that this is utter posturing. So you will not provide confidence in the ALP if they need you. Unsurprisingly, no response. Knowing the SEP analysis of such parties, their blaming of racism would be no surprise to you, but this does seem to indicate that their strategy in leading a fake anti-war movement in order to safely euthanize it might take this sort of line. Any thoughts? Further to that, I saw an article of interviews conducted near me at Box Hill Central shops, with many quoted as being turned off the LNP for being anti-China. This will end in tears for those holding any hope that the ALP will be different. Anyone who'd like to deal with the those two questions? And of course, I know we only have two of our candidates speaking today, because obviously 6 is quite a lot, but rest assured our candidates are in the audience, and they're more than welcome to provide answers or comments on any aspect of the meeting itself. And also we will be holding other meetings in the course of the next month, to which our other candidates will be speaking. So rest assured you will certainly be able to hear from them. I mean, the question on Assange, I'm not sure whether Oscar Grenfell, who is our other New South Wales candidate, is in the audience.
Yeah, hi, greetings to everyone in attendance. I think it is a very important question, and I think the answer is bound up with the material that Comrades Max and Mike detailed in their very important reports. I think the fundamental point that needs to be made about Labor is that this is a party that has no connection to the working class whatsoever. It's hostile to the working class. It supports war, attacks on democratic rights, and austerity. And in this campaign, the extremely right-wing pitch that Albanese is making, the essential class character of Labor is coming to the fore. And to the extent that he has differed with Morrison on any issue, it's been from the right. You know, their criticism on the Solomon Islands is that Labor, the government didn't prosecute aggression against this tiny Pacific nation forcefully enough on behalf of the US. Similarly, on the social issues, Labor is presenting itself to big business as the party best placed to carry out sweeping attacks on the jobs, wages and conditions of the working class. So I think, I mean, that's a crucial component of our campaign, fighting for that understanding of the Labor Party. It is, you know, a right-wing capitalist party, and there is no difference whatsoever between Labor and the Liberals. On the specific issue of Assange, one of the points that we've made is that his persecution is an attack on him and on WikiLeaks for historic exposures of war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's also part of a broader attempt to intimidate the widespread anti-war sentiment that exists. And it's worth, just going back to how this began. As most people in the audience will recall, in 2010, WikiLeaks published a series of documents leaked by Chelsea Manning, the courageous US Army whistleblower. They exposed mass killings in Iraq, Afghanistan, the infamous collateral murder video, and also there were hundreds of thousands of diplomatic cables published revealing US imperialism's meddling operations in every corner of the globe. 2010, that's when in Australia there was a Greens-backed minority Labor government, the government of Julia Gillard. Its response to the WikiLeaks revelations and the attacks on Assange was to denounce Assange as a criminal. That's something that Gillard did, to pledge to work with the US intelligence agencies to destroy WikiLeaks, and also to threaten to revoke Assange's passport, something, again, completely illegal, highly vindictive attack. But I think it's just worth quickly recalling what else was taking place in 2010, 2011. The Greens-backed Labor government was aligning Australia with the pivot to Asia, this vast military build-up in the Asia-Pacific directed against China. The attacks on Assange went hand in hand with stepped-up preparations for war, particularly against China. I think a decade on, and those processes are far more advanced, as we've seen over recent days with the comments both from Dutton and senior Labor Party figures. The issue of a war and an imminent war is very much on the agenda. And under those conditions, Assange is just anathema. That's why none of the official parties will defend him, including the Greens. And it's why, as we really stress, the fight for Assange's freedom depends on the development of a political movement of the working class against the entire establishment, as part of the fight against war, the fight in defence of democratic and social rights. But I'll just make those points.
Thanks a lot, Oscar. I think those points are important. And I know there's other questions, and Alan has asked another very important question. But in relation to this, Grace has raised that the ALP has lost its way and it doesn't reflect what they originally stood for, which I think is important. So, Mike, did you want to deal with that?
Yes, thanks. That's a very important issue. Just to add to what Oscar said, I agree completely with what he said. But he made an important point also in a recent article he wrote on this question of Assange, and that is the Laborites and everybody else in the political establishment is worried about the popular support that does exist for Julian Assange. We've made this point in Britain with regard to Jeremy Corbyn, who didn't say a word while he was Labor leader. And the same goes for Albanese. If they raised even a peep, it would attract support. And I know on our campaign in Brisbane, to get the nomination signatures to get onto the ballot, we had, we showed the picture before of people signing up for our campaign, we had the question of Julian Assange very prominently on display. And that was a very attractive issue. There is a deep, ongoing, still groundswell of support for Assange and real outrage and horror at what successive governments have done to Assange. Of course, there are many young people who don't know much about Assange, and but we can also explain the significance. But I agree with what Oscar said. Labor, and this goes to Grace's question, I think we've got to understand Labor has always been the party of war. Not that it has departed from its foundations. The Labor Party was established by the trade unions in the 1890s to essentially always head off you know, the development of the working class into the class struggle against Australian capitalism. It was always founded on a definitely, distinctly anti-Marxist platform, and one of also of Australian nationalism, including white Australia. That was the founding program of the Labor Party. Now, yeah, and they were brought to office not just in World War II, but in World War I as well. Billy Hughes, you know, to carry out the war and seek to impose conscription in World War I, which they failed to do, despite having a referendum twice on that question. But the Labor Party, when capitalism could afford certain crumbs off the table, as it were, Labor and the unions were able to extract certain limited concessions for the working class, always within the framework, the straitjacket of wage labor, that is, of capitalist exploitation. Where the high point was Whitlam, you might say, in 1972, after 23 years of Liberal rule, Whitlam came in and was compelled by popular pressure from below amongst workers and students to introduce certain reforms, such as free university education, you know, certain welfare measures, and so on. But once that no longer became possible, as the global capitalist crisis deepened from the 1970s on, of course, Labor became turned into a party, an agency, and the unions, whose role is the opposite, to take back from the working class the past gains that it has made. Now, we've analysed this with regard to the globalisation of production that really developed, you know, in the 1970s, 80s, which has pulled the rug from underneath, shattered the basis for any perspective based on national reformism, getting a few concessions within a protected national framework. That has gone. And the Hawke-Keating governments, which Max referred to earlier, they carried out in Australia what Reagan and Thatcher carried out elsewhere. They imposed on the working class, in complete collaboration and close partnership with the union, the trade unions, a program of pro-market restructuring and deregulation, privatisation. And in that sense, that's always been the true colours, in fact, of the Labor Party. At certain points in history, they've been able to offer certain concessions, but that's long gone. That's long gone. So I just think it's important. What they're doing with Assange, therefore, is actually in keeping with the whole history of Labor as the party of war. And that's why Albanese and O'Connor are again raising the heritage of John Curtin. John Curtin as the man who not only led the country into war when the Conservative government collapsed on the floor of Parliament, but also was the author of the American Alliance. And Labor is pitching itself, as we tried to explain today, it's volunteering its services to Washington as the party which will not, you know, be derelict in its duty in the Solomons or anywhere else, that will ensure that the interests of US imperialism are completely prosecuted. As Oscar explained, this was very sharp with Gillard, of course, but it remains a consistent position of Labor. So, I mean, just to conclude, we are urging people to study this history, study the history of Labor and the unions. And there's plenty of reading material that we'll refer to later which can help with that, and draw the conclusions. You know, we need a totally opposed party, a party of internationalism, a party of the international working class, again, that will fight to overturn capitalism, not subordinate the working class to capitalist exploitation. Just make those points.
Thanks, Mike. Now, I don't know whether Grace is clarified by that. If you want to make any other comments, please feel free. Alan has also raised what the SEP is putting forward, recommending for votes other than in the Senate in the 3 states in which we are fielding candidates. What are your recommendations for the lower house? Is it abstention? So I'm not sure whether, Mike, you want to do that, but also I would call on our other candidates. If you want to jump in, feel free, or whether Max wants to deal with this.
We don't give preferences, and we don't advocate a vote for anybody where we're not standing. Of course, it's compulsory to vote in Australia, which is actually anti-democratic, and we advocate if there's none of our candidates are on the ballot paper, just draw a line through it. You can write on there, vote, SEP, vote Socialist Equality Party, to register your position. But we would not recommend a vote for any other party, as we've explained in this meeting. And we refuse to give preferences to any other party in the Senate or anywhere else. And we will not, of course, we will not engage in any horse trading with other parties whatsoever. But that's, for us, is a matter of principle. There is no other party that you should possibly be supported. Now, at the moment, we haven't got the resources, to stand everywhere. We'd like to be able to do that. But of course, even then, as we say, it won't be resolved through Parliament. It's a bigger question. We stand in elections not primarily for votes. Votes are important as an expression of, your support for socialism, but in order to help build a movement in the working class. That's the essential question. We stand in elections. We fight so hard to get into elections in order to have our right, our democratic right, to broadcast as broadly as we can, to fight for a totally opposed socialist perspective. So I just make those points. I hope that helps.
Well, we can continue that. Also, Max wanted to make a point, and then we've got some other questions.
Just in regards to the question from Brenton, I'm not sure of the specific discussions or positions that the Greens put forward, but I think, or that you're raising in terms of racism, but I think, to be absolutely clear, the Greens are not an anti-war party. Their interests, and this has been well documented and put forward, and their position is that the Australian military should be used not for, or even when they were putting criticisms forward of the wars in the Middle East, that it should not be used in the Middle East, but to propagate the interests of US imperialism in the region. Even after the Obama's announcement of the pivot to Asia, which it was referenced by Comrade Mike in his report, the former Greens leader Bob Brown, very much welcomed the rebalance, as he called it, in the Asian region. In other words, completely lined up with this US imperialism shift to seek to control that area. We don't even have to go back that far. I think one of the sharpest expressions was, you'll recall, there was the Brereton report, which was released, I believe it was in late 2020, which detailed just the shocking horrors and brutality that the Australian Special Forces unleashed across Afghanistan, including images of Special Forces drinking from, I think it was a false leg, various other things. Murdered at least, I think, nearly 40 civilians. And in that kind of occurrence, the Greens feigned a certain level of distress, but interestingly, there was a kind of a mid-ranked Chinese official who posted a tweet expressing the kind of shock at the Brereton report, which had a kind of a cartoonish graphic of an Australian soldier holding a knife to the throat of the Afghan child. And this was then utilised and seized upon by the entire media and political establishment to claim that this was just utterly reprehensible, that the Chinese government would put this forward, that this is an attack on the Australians. I mean, under conditions, and Cheryl did raise at Anzac Day, people that died for quote unquote Australia, etc., etc. And the Greens completely lined up. They said it was contemptible on this kind of anti-Chinese rant and lining up against this tweet, whilst completely covering over the realities of the horrors of what had been carried out by the Australian military. So the Greens are not an anti-war party. The Greens were in a minority government with the Labor Party, in which there was no doubt open discussion of the pivot to Asia and what that would mean in terms of a drive to war against China. They covered over that. They were asked directly many times on what they knew about this, including at different appearances in which we were able to intervene, and they shut it down and didn't allow any discussion covering over the realities of what's been developed. So the Greens are no anti-war party.
Thanks, thanks, Max. Look, we have got numbers of other questions coming in. Well, that's a comment, but I will just call out the questions at the moment. And Penny and Rob have raised another very important question. Will the SEP capitulate to the forces of capitalism if they receive sufficient support? The pressure from US administrations is obviously very high. How would they counter this pressure? A good question. Mary has asked a question: would a war with China end in Pine Gap being a major strategic target for China, perhaps a nuclear target? And then there is a question from Robert. Why hasn't the World Socialist website taken up Scott Ritter's evidence of who was responsible for the massacre at Butcher in early April? Ritter showed that the corpses lacked the signs of decay for murders purported to have occurred on March the 19th. He detailed aspects of the clothing of those killed, indicating they were collaborators of the Russian forces. Also, they were heading for the Russian lines. Look, there's a lot of important questions. I mean, there is Mike and Max, but are there anyone in the audience who wants to contribute as well?
A couple of quick points. Look, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar in detail with Scott Ritter's material on Butcher, but we have written extensively on the World Socialist website on the fraudulent, allegations about that massacre. I haven't got it in front of me right now, but I'm sure if you go back, you'll find we raised the obvious questions along the lines that you suggest, Robert, about the most likely manufactured character of not just those allegations, but many of the supposed massacres that are taking place. We know that in Ukraine you have fascistic forces like the Azov Battalion and others who are perfectly capable of and have a record of carrying out massacres of their own, of ordinary people in Ukraine, under Hitler, and more recently, since the 2014 coup orchestrated by the United States. And so, there is good reason to doubt all these allegations, which of course come from the same people who gave us the lies of weapons of mass destruction, the same intelligence services and their government. So I hope that helps. I mean, just on the question of Pine Gap, while I'm speaking, in fact, I'm working on an article now about Pine Gap. It's been upgraded now to deal with hypersonic missiles, which are going to be based in Australia with a long range and can fly at 5 times the speed of sound. They'll be targeting China. And Pine Gap Base, for many years, authorised by successive Australian governments, including Whitlam, have allowed this base to exist. It's always been a nuclear target, actually, and even more so now than ever before. But what this article I'm working on is based on a report that appeared nowhere in the media here, except in the Saturday paper, the weekend before last, that there were 3 leading US generals in talks at Pine Gap in March, where they discussed these upgradings for hypersonic missiles and also space warfare involving Pine Gap. And that's where the quote I gave came from Admiral Aquilina about Australia being an extremely high-end partner. They were the quotes he gave to the Financial Times in London after the discussions at Pine Gap. For those who don't know, I mean, Pine Gap, of course, is just near Alice Springs. It's a satellite communications base. It is pivotal to every war operation that the United States carries out in the Indo-Pacific region, right up into the Middle East, across the Eurasian landmass. It's part of a partner station in Britain, but it's always been very, very pivotal to America's entire war plans and operations around the world. When people get assassinated by drones, in Afghanistan or Pakistan, that's coming from targeting, which involves the use of the Pine Gap base and so on. So it's definitely a target, and really, well, the United States is making Australia a target. Let's put it that way, by putting Australia as a forward base, for its confrontation with China. Just make those points for now.
Thanks, Mike. I didn't notice our candidate, Peter Byrne, who has indicated to speak. Peter is the Senate candidate, one of the 2 Senate candidates in Victoria. He is also a long-standing member of the SEP, has stood in elections multiple times, and is very experienced. So I'd open up for Peter.
Thanks, Cheryl. Look, firstly, I'd just say that I'm very proud to be a candidate for the Socialist Equality Party in the Senate in Victoria. I just wanted to make a couple of points on Penny and Rob's question, will the SEP capitulate? I think firstly, the Socialist Equality Party was established in 2010 as a continuation of the Socialist Labour League, which was established 50 years ago at Easter in 1972. Over 50 years, the Socialist Labour League and the Socialist Equality Party have played an absolutely critical role in the history of the Australian working class as a section of the International Committee of the Fourth International. So, we enter this election under conditions where the Australian state, in the form of the Australian Electoral Commission, acting on legislation, bipartisan legislation passed by the Liberal and Labor parties, has decided that the Socialist Equality Party is no longer a registered party. First and foremost, this is extremely undemocratic for a party with, 50 years of history of struggle, and a public stance in the working class through its multiple publications and now through the most widely read socialist website, the World Socialist website. So, the very base of this election in that sense is undemocratic. The people won't know, won't see the Socialist Equality Party identifying our candidates on the ballot paper. The question of will the SEP capitulate, again, is a very important question, because the history of the working class is littered with parties which have betrayed the working class once they've gained power or entered parliament. The first thing I'd say is that, we're at a period in history where the working class can no longer outsource its political interests to a party as such. And what the Socialist Equality Party represents is a party based in the working class, which can only fulfill its role in politics through the active participation of the working class, that it is basically a democratic party which requires and necessitates the active involvement of the working class in it. So the party is not separate from the working class. One of the bases of the socialist democracy is the instant recall of delegates. That is, so a delegate who gets into a higher body, if they start to do the dirty on their constituents, can be immediately removed and replaced by someone who will, do what the body that's put him in that position has voted for. That's not parliamentary democracy. Parliamentary democracy is a form of bourgeois democracy where candidates are elected and can do basically whatever they want. And as everyone knows, every politician today in the major parties is making promises that they know and the electors know they won't keep. So the question, that is posed before the working class in general is the necessity to build a party that represents its interests. And as I said, that requires its active participation. And the conception of the Socialist Equality Party as a section, again, of the International Committee of the Fourth International is that the working class has to take political power. That means the working class has to engage in politics in a manner where they run society. And that means the working class, actively participating in every decision that's made by the governing bodies on their behalf. So what that poses again is the necessity for everyone today to consider seriously joining and building this party. Certainly voting for us, but voting in and of itself won't change anything. What is required is the development of the political conscience of the working class and the development and the building of the party.
Thanks, Peter. Look, we have got a number of questions for Jayasekera. I will read them out, and as Peter has highlighted, the founding of the SEP, the Socialist Equality Party, in 2010, I will also draw your attention to our historical and international foundations document. Now, the questions for Jayasekera are: the ruling class in Sri Lanka have to retain rule and have always sought to divide the working class along racial, ethnic, religious and nationalist lines. In the protests that have erupted, workers across the board are united against the government. How are the main parties working to break up this unity, and how does the SEP combat and fight against this? Another one is, can you comment on the demand by the pseudo-lefts in the Sri Lankan revolt that there be no politics? And the final question is, in Sri Lanka, in Sri Lanka, is it expected that millions of children will die from starvation in a year's time? Now, before we open up for Jayasekera to answer, as I said, I would like to draw attention to our book and document, the historical and international foundations of the Socialist Equality Party. This was adopted by the Congress, the founding Congress of the SEP in 2010, and is the outline, the political outline of the analysis of our party. It is the basis of agreement on this history and political perspective that is the basis for membership. And an understanding and an agreement of this history is a basic component of the ability to both understand and fight for the program of our movement and of membership of our movement. And I think as Peter has outlined, our party is a party like no other. Every member who joins is expected and encouraged to participate as much as they possibly can, not just in the day-to-day work of the party, but in the political analysis. We have a Congress every 2 years. We discuss the political perspective, the program, in that sense, the line, the analysis of our movement, which of course the very basis of that is the fight for the overthrow of capitalism. As our perspectives document, our election statement said, our party is not standing candidates in order that we can have people, members elected to Parliament in order that they get large remuneration, that they have a cushy job. If we were to be elected Parliament, we would use Parliament, we would use those elected members to expose the role of Parliament. Any funding which is provided for members of Parliament would be handed over, except for the normal wage that a party member or a worker gets. It is not the basis for the development of wealth for an individual. Our movement, our members, fight for a political perspective which is the basis for membership. And it is discussed in congresses, in branches, and is voted on. And I think that the pressure which certainly exists is not so much from US administrations, but the conception of, is it possible? Is it possible to overthrow capitalism? Is the capacity of the working class as a revolutionary class capable of carrying through its task? And in that sense, it has been that pressure which has been exerted upon the socialist movement really for 100 years. It's not so much bribes or those sorts of pressures that the revolutionary movement has exerted on it, but the concept that the working class is not capable of carrying out its task, that we have to pressure other parties, that it's the Labour Party or it as it used to be the Communist Party, that you've got to work through Parliament. No, I think they're the real pressures that can be exerted upon the party, not so much either the threats from imperialism, which are real at certain times, and they're real against the working class. And so the issues that we fight for, the strength of our commitment, is not based upon faith or hope, but on a scientific understanding of capitalism and of, as Marx called it, the gravedigger of capitalism, and that is the working class. The working class is a revolutionary class, not because of what it thinks about itself, not because it understands necessarily at every juncture that it is a revolutionary class, but because objectively it's a revolutionary class, because of its relationship to the means of production, because it has no relationship to the means of production as the ruling class did under feudalism. The working class's only relationship is that it has to sell its labour power. And so for that reason, it is the only class which can in fact overthrow capitalism. It is the only class which is capable of in that sense, breaking the ties of the capitalist class and overthrowing it and taking into its relationship, into its ownership, the means of production, in order that it is organized on the basis of what society needs and not for the profits of a tiny few. And I think, as Peter also outlined, we are actually celebrating the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Socialist Labour League, the predecessor of the SEP. The SLL was founded in Easter of 1972. And for 50 years, we have fought for a socialist perspective within the Australian working class and within the international working class. Just as COVID cannot be dealt with on a national basis, climate change cannot be dealt with on a national basis, war cannot be undertaken and averted on a national basis. We are an international organisation because the working class is an international class. And so it is on that basis that I want to appeal to you to donate to our $50,000 election fund. The only source of our funds are our supporters, our members, workers, students, young people. We get no state funding, and we would not accept state funding. We get nothing from corporations, we get no donations, no sponsorship. Literally, our only source of funding and support is from the working class, and in particular from you, from our supporters. The nomination fees for candidates doubled in this election. Every candidate, we had to pay $2,000. The development of our campaign, particularly on social media, is going to cost a huge amounts of money because we want to be able to disseminate our program, our perspective, our analysis. Certainly we will, and we are printing our normal printed election statement, but we also want to develop our campaign on social media, and it will cost a great deal of money. And so we are appealing to you today to donate to us, to be as generous as you possibly can, to provide us with the resources that we can fight to overcome not only the attempt to silence us, not only the imposition where we stand candidates and we are unable to under our own name, but to overcome that. And we do that by, in that sense, utilising the mechanism of the election campaign to provide this analysis. I will hand over to Jayasekera, who will answer those questions.
Yeah, thanks for the questions, the important questions. Regarding first one, regarding this attempts by main parties to break this unity across the communal lines, which has been seen clearly in this growing protest movement. Yeah, that has been one of the characteristics and importance in this protest movement, this unity across the communal lines. Despite decades-long efforts by the parties of the political establishment, divide the working class along communal lines. So not only government party, all other parties of the political establishment are very much feared about this development. So they are working to break it. Especially the ruling party, they have deployed or employed their prominent Sinhala Buddhist racialist supporters, including these notorious Buddhist monks. I think 1 week ago, they have tried to organize a provocative march of mainly from Buddhist monks from somewhere in Colombo to this goal-based green main protest site. So they have gathered several Buddhist monks, including young monks, telling them that they have been invited for some religious conference or religious discussions. So telling lies to these Buddhist monks, young monks, to use them as a provocative march to this gold-based green main protest site. But on the way, this march dispersed because most of these monks, they did not want to, young monks, they didn't want to join in a provocation. But at that point, the leading Buddhist monk called some Ittapane Dhammalankara, and also the another person, his name is Dan Piasad. He's a leading member of this Sinhala Buddhist racialist fascistic outfit called Boddy Sena. It means Buddhist Power Brigade, led by notorious Sinhala racist Buddhist monk Galagodatte Jnanasara. This Dan Piasad and other Buddhist monk Ittapane Dhammalankara, they threatened gold-based green protesters, and they said that this president Gotabaya Rajapaksa was elected by Sinhala Buddhists, so Sinhala Buddhists will not allow to overthrow him, and they threatened these gold-based protesters, and they did it some few days ago. Before this traditional festival here called Sinhala Hindu New Year, they threatened these protesters that you would not be allowed to stay in this protest site after this festival period, like that. Anyway, they could not gather or mobilize such necessary forces to make this provocation. So in this way, they are working to break this unity. And also from the side of the Tamil Busa nationalist parties, including main Tamil party called Tamil National Alliance. So they kept silence for more than a week about this growing protest against the government of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. Then, but the people, youths, students, especially in North, in Jaffna, they started their own protest in support of this anti-government protest in Colombo and other parts of the island. Then these Tamil nationalist parties and also the student bodies affiliated or some associated with Tamil nationalist parties, they try to dissuade and discourage Tamil students joining with this protest, saying that these protests are carried out by Sinhalese. They earlier supported the Gotabaya Rajapaksa. They brought Gotabaya Rajapaksa to power. Now they have realized, but he should not involve in this like that. But despite that, Tamil speaking students in Jaffna University joined with their Sinhalese and Muslims colleagues in protest march against Rajapaksa. So that's the way, and SCP is fighting on the basis of working class unity, working class internationalism, to counter these efforts by various sections of the ruling elite to divide this unity. So we are fighting to establish the unity across the lines on the basis of the class line, mobilizing the working class cutting across religious and ethnic lines, and also the national lines, and mobilizing and rallying the other sections of the oppressed masses, Jews, rural poor, around the working class in a program and perspective of international socialism. So that is struggle is a part of the struggle to establish the unity of Sri Lankan working class with their class brothers and sisters in South Asia and internationally on the basis of the international socialism. Regarding this no politics, this protest movement, the organizers, this protest movement, one character of this protest movement, it developed or emerged out of all parties of the political establishment and their pseudo-left hangers on, and also out of the unions. So that also a reflection of widespread dissatisfaction and anger among the workers, youth, and professionals towards all those parties. And the organizers, they call this movement is no politics or non-party, but they are utilizing those to exclude the revolutionary socialist politics advocated only by the SCP. These several pseudo-left organizations, mainly this frontline socialist party, they are also involved in this protest, but they are not presenting their party name or party banner, they are hiding it. So they are the main people who are trying to block, sometimes threatening violence, SCP political interventions. Despite their threats and opposition, the comrades of the SCP and its youth and student wing, IYSSC, have been continuously intervened in this protest, including the main protest site in Goldface Green, distributing thousands of copies, as I said in my report, in Sinhalese and Tamil, our main statement dated on April 7, and also our comrades joined this protest with our own placards, with our party name, with our own slogans. Our organization is the only political party who has intervened in this movement with its own name and its own slogans, especially its own political program and perspective. And also, the situation is, some comrades asked about this starvation situation yeah, such a situation is already people facing. It is getting worse because of these prices and severe shortages of essential food items, including main staple in the country, rice, and also the milk powder. Actually, this is very much due to this government decision to ban import of chemical fertilizer. It was done because of their severe crisis, lack of foreign currency, but they try to hide it in a way that they are going to implement the carbonic farming, because this chemical fertilizer is some poisonous and toxic to the human lives like that. But so it has created such a decline of harvesting crops, including this rice production. So now they have to import rice from the countries, but it has also severely affected by the lack of foreign currency, and also due to the devaluation of the rupee, prices has skyrocketed, where people can't afford or reach. So the starvation situation is developing here because of this lack of main, and skyrocketing prices of main food items, especially including the milk powder, severely affecting children.
Thank you. Look, we are going to have to start to wind up, but we've got a couple of other questions that we need to address. One is from Graham on what are we putting forward in regards to the war in Ukraine? Do we demand the ending of the providing of weapons from US NATO to Ukraine without being accused of supporting Putin's invasion? Again, that's an important point. And Comrade Max will deal with that. And then there's the other question on, could you elaborate on how your candidates would go about exposing Parliament if all of them were elected? So Max, I'll hand over to you, and then Mike will answer the last question.
Thanks for the question, Graham. We answer briefly to start off with. We call for the unity of the Ukrainian and Russian working class, and this question, or this, the demand that has to be placed forward for this international unified anti-war movement is in that sense, not simple, but is absolutely essential. What has been unleashed in the Ukraine is a war of global dimensions. Comrade Jayasekera's important contribution today reveals that what has been set in motion by US imperialism and its allies in its war drive against Russia, and then Putin's reckless response and invasion is a crisis, as I say, of global dimensions, whilst most sharply reflected in Sri Lanka with, conditions as Jayasekera went through, in which workers can't get 2 square meals, lines around the block for basic fuel and resources. That is a situation that is now confronting the working class internationally and in various other countries. These processes were in place before the war, but have been accelerated by it. So just as this war is itself something of a global, is a war of a global dimension, so too does the response by the working class have to be. And that is the absolute necessity of building an international revolutionary anti-war movement. It's interesting, in Putin's kind of war speech in the lead up to the invasion, he denounced the question of 1917, the Russian Revolution, above all because what he's and his entire the oligarchy represent is a return to the kind of czarist Russian chauvinism of pre-1917. I mean, that is what they're turning to. And as we say, the way forward for the working class in Russia and the Ukraine is not a return to pre-1917, but a renewal of the same proletarian revolutionary internationalism that led to the October Revolution. So when one is opposing both Putin's invasion and the drive to war by US and NATO, I think the point is we don't follow the war map of bourgeois countries. We follow the class struggle, and the same kind of conditions that are giving rise to war are giving rise to its answer. That is the beginnings of the mass revolutionary movements of the working class. Again, Sri Lanka is the sharpest expression, but in this country, the process is also underway, as we detailed, I think, in some of the reports of the mass strike action. So opposing the criminal invasion of Putin in no way gives credence to the US NATO's funneling of arms. And the point that I think has to be emphasized is that the United States is at the cockpit of the drive to war internationally. The funneling of arms into the Ukraine is not something that has just occurred overnight, but has a whole history going back to 2014 and even further. Literally billions and billions of dollars have been funneled in. And I think that what I would point to is some of our, I think, critical perspective articles that we've written, including Comrade David North's A Letter to a Russian Comrade, which perhaps can be posted into the chat, which goes into detail of this. And I think that one can't, in that sense, begin to understand the developments in the Ukraine itself outside of an understanding of the liquidation of the USSR, the final betrayal of the Stalinist bureaucracy, which has led to the return or the deepening of capitalist war drive, above all the United States, who is seeking to head off its decline, economic decline, by seeking spheres of influence and control through war, including Russia, but also China, which is, I think, a critical aspect. So, above all, what needs to be fought for is the international unity of the working class on the basis of proletarian anti-war struggle. And that's not just a question for Ukraine and Russia, but internationally, including in this country. And that's part of a critical part of our election campaign itself, the building of a genuine anti-war movement.
Thanks, Max. So, and Mike, I'll just let you finish up.
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl. Just briefly, on the question of what we would do to expose Parliament, it's another good question. First of all, for one of our candidates to be elected to Parliament would itself indicate a real revolutionary upsurge taking place. A mass movement would be underway against the whole capitalist order. And we would, of course, base ourselves on that, bringing the demands of that movement against the parliamentary establishment. Secondly, we would take a stand against every action taken by this parliamentary milieu and every government measure. We would not vote for any of their programs or legislation. But above all, Parliament is a cesspit, excuse the language, but it's, it's a facade behind which are dirty deals, secret briefings, corporate lobbyists, media lobbyists. We would, lay bare all of that at every point. Our attitude is like that of the Bolsheviks, in Russia in 1917. One of the first actions that they took in taking power was to expose all the secret treaties which the Tsarist and provisional governments had done, with the other imperialist powers. We would insist on laying bare every dirty deal that was being done behind the scenes, and all the manoeuvres and machinations which go on. I mean, just one final point. We wrote on the funeral of Kimberley Kitching a few weeks ago. She was a Labor senator who was one of the most frothing anti-China, pro-US people you could imagine. And the turnout for her funeral was just so revealing. They were all there. You know, Tony Abbott, all the far right, you know, every party was there. Pauline Hanson, they were all there. And that sums up the real state of relations in Parliament. You know, as Obama once said, it's an intramural scrimmage. They're all on the same side. And we would seek to expose all the rotten deals they do with each other. I hope that helps. We can discuss it more if you like. Okay.
Thanks, Mike. And look, at this point, I think we will have to bring our meeting to a conclusion. I think, look, the questions have and comments have been so important and very forthcoming, which is excellent. Before we close, I want to draw your attention to two other pieces of literature that we have for sale. The first is The Global Pandemic, the Class Struggle and the Tasks of the Socialist Equality Party, which was the documents of the 6th National Congress of the SEP USA for their Congress in 2020. And it is the development of our analysis of what was at that stage a virus and a pandemic which was only less than 6 months old. That analysis is entirely vindicated and confirmed. There is nothing really in that document which we would need to change. Of course, developments have progressed, they have gone forward, but that analysis is absolutely prescient. So that's $5. And the other publication is A Quarter Century of War, which is a compilation of the articles, lectures, essays, particularly written by David North, the chairman of the International Editorial Board and of the US SEP, which outlines what the headline says, the period of conflict beginning with 1990, 1991 with the invasion of Iraq by the United States for the next 25 and beyond years. Part of the development of the attempt by US imperialism to resolve its crisis of hegemony by military means. It's a very accessible, very important book, and it is available online and also at maringbooks.com. Just in ending our meeting today, I want to thank you for your attendance and ask you to very, very seriously consider the analysis, the issues, the questions that we have raised today. We are not a party of a national state. We are a party of the international working class. We are the Australian section of the International Committee of the Fourth International. And on that basis, we appeal to you to become a member of our party. If you agree with our program, if you agree with our perspective, then make the decision. We urge you to make the decision, which will be the most important decision, political decision of your life. Become part of an international movement that will fight to build and does fight to build a leadership of the working class in what is the inevitable struggles that are developing and that will further develop. Without that leadership, it doesn't matter how widespread, how mass these movements are, without a political perspective, without a party, without a leadership, they will be defeated. it is only on the basis of a Bolshevik type party that these struggles will be able to come to fruition and to carry through what is the task of the working class, and that is the overthrow of capitalism and the establishment of a socialist society. So with those words, again, I very much thank you for your attendance, for your questions, for your participation, and urge you to join our movement. Thank you.